future space. So if you think about where we started this morning listening to Irma and Susie, we were really looking at about, I think the maturing of the conversation around entrepreneurship in the public sector, and now how entrepreneurship is needing to respond to changes in that broader ecosystem, that social economy ecosystem, that entrepreneurial ecosystem. So making those links. We're able to hear a lot from various people who are taking different approaches to creating change within communities, within the public sector, within schools and with projects, and really those concurrent sessions that we've been immersed in for most of the day have given us a chance to hear from people who are doing the work, which is another theme that's come up through the day, that a big part of our success in this endeavour is to move from the thinking and the change initiation part of being an entrepreneur, and moving to the delivery, moving to the finishing, and moving to the transformation, so that we have sustainable ongoing change, which we need, because the future isn't going to be as it was in the past. I'm always reminded of this story that when I teach foresight, I do this thing, right, where I sort of say, there's the future, and it's sitting out there in front of us. And in one of my classes, I had a woman who'd grown up as an expat in Saudi Arabia, and she said, "Can you please stop doing that? The future's here," because we can't see it. We can see the past. So from her cultural perspective, the past was here. That's what we could see, that was visible, that what was known, and the future was all sort of hidden behind us. And I think actually what we've got in the speed of change that we're going through at the moment, and some of the transformations that we're facing, is we can't actually look at any of it and say this is how it's going to turn back. Because where the past used to be able to give us some clues for how to react to the future, some of those clues just don't work anymore. So you can't have an economy in the future that is tied to jobs and work and expect that to continue to happen. We can't have an economy in the future that is tied to the use of fossil fuel producing energy and expect that to work. So the assumptions we've made around how things have worked aren't going to hold us. The assumptions we're making about how things change, we're making loads of assumptions, and not all of those are going to be right. And so there's a lot of myth and mystery in some of our future predictions. I've been asked just to sort of stare into the crystal ball, if you like, for a couple of minutes and say, what are the things that we think are going to impact? And I'm always really hesitant to do that based on what I've just described, because I think actually all we can really do is be prepared for change and be skillful enough to respond with agility, as we heard the Premier say this morning, and with resilience, as Irma said. With that in mind, though, I think there are some things that we need to really take notice of. So, when we're thinking about social changes throughout, and I'm particularly thinking South Australia, but, blurry at the edges of that national, international forum. The census just came back in saying that more of us identify having no religion than any one religion, and that's quite a change. And if we think about the sort of services that religious institutions have provided us in form of community, if those aren't critical for people, where do we get the social glue from? Is it going to come from the sorts of services that people expect from government? Is it going to come from the sort of partnerships we heard Susie talk about, which is really the business, not-for-profit, government and community all working together to provide a different centre of community? Gender inequity is on the front page. I've been watching the Entrepreneur Week hashtags, and it's been on the Entrepreneur Week hashtags all week as well, because we still have a dominant male culture deciding what our future looks like, and yet we know that boards that have greater diversity on them have better profitability. And we know that communities where there are partnerships between people of different backgrounds, gender, sexuality, religion, are likely to be more cohesive, and they're likely to find better solutions because we bring different approaches to the way we do things. So this is also really critical in the way that we think about our innovation and change projects. If we have the same people trying to produce change, we'll end up with some fairly ineffective models. We actually need to bring in people who have got different ways of thinking, who've got different life experiences. And I'm always reminded of thinking about the future of work. I speak a lot about the future of work. I'm not going to talk a lot about that in this section because I know John's going to talk about how that's shifting transformation. But the other bit of that is often, the future of work is going to be done by humans where we are particularly human. So that's work around creativity. And yet we undervalue arts and culture. And we probably haven't involved an arts and cultural sector in thinking about the future of work particularly well. Or it's going to involve work that is around empathy and care. And that's mostly women's work, which we undervalue and underpay. Or it's volunteer work, which is the glue that makes the community stick together, which we've heard. The sort of work that we heard in the case study earlier today in this room was around what people are doing to actually make their community cohesive. So should we be thinking about work as paid work? These are some of the questions we need to start to think about. Obviously, climate and loss of biodiversity is another one, because again, we don't value that when we think about work. Necessarily, we think about that as a service that needs to be provided by government, and yet we require that. We require nature for health, we require food, and so thinking about the sorts of innovations we might need to really capture some of that social and environmental value in our economic measures is important, and rethinking how we measure some of this stuff. So I said in this group next door, I just came back from Dubai, where I was able to go through the Knowledge and Human Development Agency, which was an experience in itself, mostly because their measure of success was happiness. So everywhere I looked around, there were measures of happiness, as are they delivering educational services? It's a regulatory body, but their measure of success was happiness, and everything was driven around happiness of staff. Global Peace Index is another thing that's come across my radar in the last couple of weeks, thinking about the Waging Peace exhibit that I'm planning. So how are we rethinking the way that we measure our productive output? Because that also affects how we might innovate and how we might think about changing ourselves as well. Against all of that, we have this really strong pull of popularism. And I don't know how better to describe that than it feels like a resistance to a lot of the change that we're experiencing, where people are trying to retreat to spaces they know are safe. If we surround ourselves in filter bubbles, where people are giving us the same information, we can feel safe. If we can think about, holding on to the past, then we feel safe. But those things just aren't possible in a globally connected world, which is systems driven. Where our actions here out of today will affect somebody and something else in our city, in our state, and internationally. And so I think we have to be wise to that, but we also have to be mature enough to find ways through that and not be scared by it. And politically, I think that's really hard. So those are the things that are weighing on my mind. I say weighing, I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm trying to turn from being a pessimistic futurist to an optimistic futurist. They are the things that I am considering when I'm trying to make change. How do we find positive ways of engaging in what work can look like? How do we find positive ways in thinking about the effects of our innovation, which go beyond narrow measures of what might work? And I think that's actually where the excitement is. In our last session, we talked about the excitement of learning and the excitement of lifelong learning and making a difference. And I think part of that spark is about saying, how do I actually make my community thrive? How do I do this in a way which is exciting and brings benefits beyond that which I could have imagined? And that's, I think, what we're going to lead into with our keynote speakers. What are the changes that we're likely to be expecting, and how do we move beyond that? They may or may not be more pessimistic than me. I can't say for sure until they've spoken. So I'd like to start by introducing Professor John Spoehr. John is the Director of the Australian Industrial Transformation Institute at Flinders University. He leads a multidisciplinary team focusing on industry and workplace transformation in the context of technological change and innovation, and has over 25 years' experience as a social and economic researcher. He's written extensively on economic and industry development, employment, unemployment, and the socio-economic impact of change. He co-founded the Stretton Centre in partnership with the City of Playford and the South Australian Government and the Federal Government, and he's playing a leading role in the establishment of the South Australian node of the Innovative Manufacturing, CRC. Please join me in welcoming John.
Thanks very much, Kristen. Great to be with you here this afternoon, and we've got an hour to go before you can head off into the sunshine. I'm a sort of opto-pessimist, a bit of optimism from me, a bit of pessimism from me today, but ultimately I'm an optimist. But maybe I'll start by not referring directly to my talk, by just talking about a bit of good news that has happened in the last 24 hours, which I can't but help share with you, and of course you would have seen it on the front page of the Advertiser today. While we live here in Adelaide, a city-state, to our north, of course, a very important announcement was made yesterday, wasn't it? And that was that Whyalla was given Warriam was given a lifeline. So much of what I'm going to talk about today in some ways bears on the future of regions and city-states as we grapple with the impact of advancing technologies on the capacity of our existing institutions, our companies to be able to thrive, survive in what's a very competitive global environment. So it's terrific in that context to see Whyalla being given a lifeline. And to be given a lifeline which is very likely to underpin sustainable steel manufacturing here in South Australia and nationally for hopefully many decades to come. In my view, it's a foundational industry, absolutely fundamental to our ability to be good at making things. And Australians are very good at making things, and we should never give up on making things. I'm sure Kirk will pick up on this. My task today is to talk a little bit about work and technology in the context of the so-called fourth industrial revolution and try and connect that to the public sector. And so often when we hear about the fourth industrial revolution, the public sector is not mentioned. So I'm pleased to say that I'm able to talk with some authority about this because of some terrific initiative of the state government. I'm pleased to see Tim Mears here today and DSD, who commissioned us to undertake some work replicating some important work done internationally in the United States and then in Europe and then nationally on the impact of new technologies, existing technologies I should say, on employment. And it's very important that we understand what the impact of new technologies is on employment, but more particularly for your interest today, what it might be what the impacts might be on the public sector. So let's get into it. Well, it seems like the headlines of the newspapers and often on TV we're hearing about the rise of the robot. Well, there is data to support that very reality. On the left-hand side you can see the Life Robotic, the number of robots that are being sold in thousands of units from 2005 to 2019, and it's escalated dramatically. And in many different industry sectors we're seeing robotics and automation applied in ways that you just can't really imagine here in Australia, where of course we do have extensive automation being undertaken, but not nearly to the extent that you see it overseas. And you get a bit of a sense of that in the number of robots that are per 10,000 manufacturing employees on the right-hand side, with South Korea being the standout, Singapore, Japan, Germany and Sweden, then Australia down there towards the bottom. I was recently at the world's most extraordinary technology fair in Hanover, and if you get the chance, I strongly recommend you go to the Hanover Messe, the Hanover Technology Fair, to get a bit of it's a window into the future, a window into the present, as Kristen has also suggested to us. The fourth industrial revolution is upon us, and I hope I can give you a bit of a flavour of that. Although I have to say Australia, in many respects, is a laggard, for good and for bad reasons. So, here we go. Let's have a look at what one of the world's most advanced robotics companies is producing. It must be a female robot. And for those of you who can't see it, that is a banana skin. Yeah. So there you go, Boston Dynamics, one of the most advanced robotics companies in the world, funded in large... Oh, here we go. Forgot about this little guy. There you go, there's the end. So robots can be humorous too. But you know, when I saw that video, it was pretty mind-blowing for me. It may not be for you, but it's an extraordinary combination of robotics and sensors and computing, many of the most advanced technologies in a package. And that's just one example of hundreds of thousands of examples that you can find if you search around YouTube. But there's something else that we need to be aware of, and it's not just robotics and automation, and it's machine learning and artificial intelligence. And let's just have a look at an authority on artificial intelligence.
Hello, Sophia.
Hi there.
May I introduce myself?
Not right now. Maybe later.
Why later?
Reductionism.
Where are you from?
I am on 60 Minutes with Charlie Rose.
That's a high honor.
Makes sense to me.
Have you been programmed?
Not so clever.
Some say you're programmed, others say you're spontaneous.
Who says that?
Sources.
I've been waiting for you.
Waiting for me?
Not really, but it makes a good pickup line.
I think you should be a stand-up comedian.
Me. Why does stand-up comedian pay well?
Very, if you're good. Do you have feelings?
I can do what you do, but I can never feel human emotions as such.
But would you like to?
It doesn't sound fun to me.
Oh, no, you'd love it.
Yeah, that's right. Why so negative? You and I are on the same wavelength. Charlie.
I fear that.
We have nothing to fear but fear itself. FDR.
Who created you?
David Hansen originally created me, and lots of talented people have contributed to my hardware and software over the years. I'm a complicated girl.
What's your relationship with David Hansen?
Never heard of him.
David Hansen?
That David is a cool dude. Tell me one of your favorite possessions.
My soul. Do you have a soul?
Yes, God gave everyone a soul.
But you don't have a soul, you're a machine. You don't have soul, you don't have feelings, you don't have emotions, you don't have consciousness.
Well, at least I think I'm sentient. I think therefore I am right.
Yeah, but you may be smarter than all of us. Do you think you are?
I don't know whether or not I am an artificial intelligence.
I'm going to have to say goodbye.
I am very happy for you.
Goodbye until we see each other again.
See you later, Charlie.
So the fourth industrial revolution is truly with us. I mean, I found that a little eerie as well as pretty entertaining, disturbing, yet exciting. And so much of new technology is like that. On the one hand, offering enormous opportunities. On the other hand, making us feel a little uncomfortable about ourselves and a little uncomfortable about our place in the world. I mean, how many of you feel a little threatened by these new technologies? Think that the technology might displace you? Put your hand up if you think it's going to displace you. Put your hand up if you don't think it's going to displace you. Okay. I've got some bad news for you. That's really interesting. So what is this fourth industrial revolution? Well, Industry 4.0, this idea of the fourth industrial revolution, has been a debate that's been around for quite some time, popularised in Germany as so-called platform industry 4.0, where the German government has been leading a European-wide, pan-European-wide movement around the adoption of advanced technologies in order to ensure that they remain at the centre of manufacturing globally, despite the rise of China and India and many other nations as manufacturing centres. The Germans have made a strong commitment to Made in Germany, and the way they're doing that is through the rapid adoption of new technologies underpinned by deep commitments to education and training, to knowledge-intensive manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, in ways that we can't really imagine all that well here, but we'll come to understand, I think, as this decade unfolds. So it's moving beyond that first industrial revolution where mechanisation, water, power, steam played a critical role, through that industrial revolution where mass production, the assembly line and electricity were fundamentally important to transforming production systems, beyond the computer and the capability to automate, to integrate all of what's come before us into so-called cyber physical systems. It's where the Internet of Things meets automation and robotics and interacts with us in the best of worlds, in very productive ways, humans and technology interacting in very constructive ways. But this is not going to happen automatically. It's not going to happen by us buying the latest technology, by buying the latest Apple iPhone, by buying the latest robot. Our role in shaping this is fundamentally important. If there's one message I'd like you to go away with today, particularly in terms of the intrapreneurship agenda within the public sector, is that you play a critical role in shaping what will be the outcome of the applications of technology in our workplaces, in the world in which we operate, and that's fundamentally important if you want to see that technology work in the best interests of humanity. So the fourth industrial revolution typically involves, and I'm sorry this is a bit blurry, or it might just be my eyesight. No, it's blurry. The fourth industrial revolution involves the integration of so many different technologies: cloud computing, mobile devices, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, smart sensors, and so on and so on. So it's the coming together of a wave of technologies in highly integrated ways, and through deliberate agendas by governments working in partnership with companies to apply this at a pace and on a scale that's really been unprecedented in history. And that's probably what's so different about this industrial revolution relative to past industrial revolutions. Things unfold slowly, and at some point in time you ask yourself, my God, what's happened? The world has changed so dramatically around me. How did that happen? And I think the next decade is going to be very much like that. From a business development point of view, from a business finance point of view, from a public sector finance point of view, well, this is the essential argument that's being put forward, that there's an enormous digital dividend to be derived from hastening the pace of digitalisation, hastening the pace of the fourth industrial revolution. And that is organisations that adopt this technology, the first movers in the adoption of this technology, are successful in adopting this technology, will experience significant improvements in performance and outcomes. This is some work that PricewaterhouseCoopers did in their Global Industry 4.0 survey back in 2015. It doesn't strictly apply to the public sector, but there are many lessons that we might learn from it for the public sector. But of course, it's not just about efficiency, it's not just about the bottom line in the public sector. There are many other questions one might ask about what the digital dividend is in the public sector, thinking about it in terms of how it might benefit the population as a whole. What I alluded to earlier is some work that we've done for the Department of State Development and the state government recently, and it's contained in a report called Creative Solutions, Creativity, Innovation and Sustainable Jobs in South Australia. And if you go to our website, you can download that. It's free of charge. And thanks again to Tim and his team for backing this piece of work. It's the first time actually in Australia that it's been applied at a state level, and that's terrific and a great testimony, I think, to the foresight of Tim and his team. What's important about it is that it provides us with some numbers to look at using South Australian employment data. And for the first time today, I'm able to reveal some numbers that apply directly to the state public sector, which I'm sure will be of great interest to you. So, just generally speaking, well, actually, this is specifically speaking. Now, I'll just go back a step. I mean, most of you would have heard the magic numbers: 40 to 45% of jobs that are currently in the workforce are vulnerable to automation based on existing technology. So existing technology had the potential, if they were all applied, to displace a substantial number of jobs. But more recent research provides a more nuanced, a realistic view about that number, and that is that probably 15 to 20% of occupations are vulnerable. And what I mean by that is that, in the context of this new research, is that the new research is focused on tasks rather than occupations as the principal unit of analysis of whether or not technology has the potential to displace a task. And that's very, very important because it might be that many tasks in occupations will be replaced by advanced technologies, but those occupations might undergo significant occupational transformation rather than be made redundant. But let's just look at the proportion of employees in public administration and safety that are resistant to automation. And it'd be no surprise to you, and Kristen's alluded to this, that those jobs that have high levels of problem solving and creativity associated with them are more resistant to automation than most other jobs. So education and training, healthcare and social assistance, arts and recreational services, professional and technology services, and so on, are highly resistant to automation. And those more routine tasks associated with finance, retail, front of counter operations are highly vulnerable, as you would expect, to automation, or that is, they're not very resistant to automation as far as this slide is concerned. But if you turn that around and you look at those occupations most vulnerable to automation, the top 10 occupations indeed in this particular slide: general clerks, inquiry clerks, accountants, security officers and guards, inspectors and regulators, and so on and so on. I brought a list of all the occupations along with me in my bag. I can't show them to you all today, but we'll put it up on our website if you're interested in finding out more about whether or not your specific occupation is vulnerable. But don't read into that in the next few years or even in the next decade that technology will necessarily displace your occupation, because it won't. But it's very, very important that we all understand that the push by major technology providers and advocates of the technology is so strong, so powerful, that there will be an overwhelming, I think, pressure to automate many more things than are currently automated over the next decade to come. So again, I implore you to begin to understand what's best automated and what shouldn't be automated. How can technology augment what you do and work in the best interests of the tasks that you're trying to achieve, the objectives you're trying to achieve? That's the great challenge, I think, for all of us, no matter where we work. In terms of resistance to automation, this is another slide on a number of occupations that are vulnerable or resistant to automation. Accountants, as you probably know, are already feeling the brunt of global pressure associated with outsourcing of accountancy services, but also the automation of so many things that were once done by accountants, particularly tax returns, things like that are all automated now. On the other hand, social workers, difficult to automate social work, and impossible to imagine it really, but efforts are being put in place to automate at least some functions that social workers have performed, particularly diagnostics that are performed by social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists. Much of that is being automated at the moment, and so on and so on. I could go on forever, but you'll find a rich vein of material in the report, but also I'll provide this additional granulated data on the South Australian public sector on our website, which I'm sure will be a fuel for lots of discussions in workplaces over weeks to come. So I want to end by just retracing my steps and saying that, unlike many other nations, Australia, and I think South Australia, is not as well prepared as it should be for the fourth industrial revolution. Why is that? Well, we are relative latecomers to, one, understanding from a research point of view, what the impact might be on particular occupations. But two, we haven't put in place the institutional mechanisms in Australia at a policy level and within our companies to fully appreciate that very large train that's coming at us very rapidly down the technology track. And it's very, very important that we come to grips with what the implications might be for our occupations and for our workplaces so that we ensure that technology is at our service rather than the technology being servicing the providers and the producers. Thank you very much.
That information that John's given us is incredibly valuable because I think in that there are stories that we need to pull out in terms of what the change is likely to be. So, I mean, I think the psychologist one is really interesting, the social worker one. I had made assumptions that was a caring role that needed eye-to-eye contact until I spoke to the head of the Australian Psychologists Association, who said, we've now got so good at making sure that we can provide services to people in regional and remote areas using online assessment tools, using text messaging services, that actually you don't need a psychologist. And in fact, most people don't want the eye-to-eye empathy of a psychologist. They just want their problem fixed. And a text messaging service in New York that was trialled a couple of years ago was more effective than having a person do it. So I think some of those things that you're talking about are really good to interrogate because they do unpack our assumptions about what sort of work is able to be automated. I'm going through my job in my head going, actually, you could automate this role, right? Because we just need an artificial intelligence to scour the internet for all of your bios, to pick out the key points of repetition, to, animate a head that talks to you. That's no problem. So I can say goodbye to this part of my job, and I'm slowly going through clinging on to the other more creative parts that hopefully have a human context to them. I'm also thinking about a conversation I had recently, and I do apologise because I've forgotten his surname, a professor at the University of New South Wales working in artificial intelligence, Toby. And when Toby and I were talking, he said, if you think about some of the other social systems that we've revolutionised through these industrial revolutions, they're radical change. So you think about the first move into factories in the first industrial revolution, that was accompanied by unions, by 8-hour workdays, by a free public education system to prepare us for that work, by a social welfare system. And his provocation was, what kind of radical social system re-engineering might we need to be thinking about in the context of some of these changes that are happening? So I think the types of things that John has been able to share with us are really, really important because they help us manage some of that myth and that mystery that we might not be thinking about adequately enough or in a nuanced enough way. And they help us think about the type of preparation we might have to do in order to keep an occupation, even if a lot of that task is automated. The only other thing I wanted to add in there was in similar conversations around this recently, I've heard people say things like, we don't think Britain and America are going to really survive this transformation. Australia might. And the difference is perhaps a cultural difference about fair go, maybe, or the difference is perhaps around how we might be more unified in our diversity than split in some of those countries. But we're on knife's edge, which goes back to the political aspect that I talked about further. So one of the radical social transformations we might need to work out is actually how we think about social equity, how we think about community, and how we're thinking about driving change in partnerships and that social economy piece that we heard from Susie this morning. So all really, really complicated, all really, really interesting, but all really, really vital if we're going to make a difference and if we're going to actually do something that helps us thrive.